How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. She's a professor of human performance with over 2 decades of experience in elite sport. Today, I am joined by the one and only Sophia Nimphius. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me on, Stephen.
No problem at all. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. I suppose the first question, Sophia, is how are you? What's kind of been happening in your world recently?
Yeah, it's well, in Australia we're all paying attention to the Women's Asian Cup. So that's obviously the qualifying event for the upcoming 2027 Women's World Cup. So escalating expectations probably on the Australian side all the time. So they're through to the finals and yeah, alongside that are often a lot of meetings to chat about the development of the game. So I just came back from FIFPro Women's Football Summit, Women in Sport Congress. Um, so mostly surrounding just what's progressing in women's sport more broadly. But there's a lot that we learn just about sport and development and interesting questions. So some of it might come through here. And I know people think it's a women's specific lens, but I always say that we have the opportunity to question things we're doing in the women's game because there's more, there's not as much of this is the way things have always been done because some of
Yeah.
it has no baseline, and that's actually a freedom. And it might help us just reflect for those that have been in the men's game for a long time, just how could we do things better? And I think the sharing ultimately, we all get better.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And how have you been getting on with the traveling? I know obviously had a lot of things on from when we spoke previously. Are you kind of like used to traveling around, balancing all of the work? Because I always like to ask this question because for myself, moving to Thailand from the UK, it was kind of like I only did like one big move, if you like. How do you kind of like balance and manage traveling as well as then, having to go and present or talk or, you know, work wherever you are?
Yeah, you know what? The lived experience really makes you reflect on what you do, and I like to think that like all of that travel makes you simplify the need to do things versus the nice to do things. It's a really great framework for reflecting on how we improve athlete performance. Because performance is performance. I mean, if you go up and you just have to speak on the stage, like it may be high cognitive demand or whatnot, but ultimately, like we all know, everything's intermingled. So I just manage it. I actually start to pay attention to what I have to do to perform well. And that I think that really helps you ask better questions about what we need to do to help athletes perform well. So I try to, instead of just being sad about how tired sometimes you feel, I just think about it as just a little experimental opportunity for reflecting on what you're doing to yourself to what you're asking from your athletes, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it, really, especially if you are traveling, because there's going to be crossovers in terms of just being a person to be able to help you help you perform. Um, I did quite a brief introduction at the start, Sophia, there, but you've mentioned about touched on a couple of points there of presenting the current work that you're doing now. But for everyone listening who might not know your background, your experience, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Yeah, yeah, I always do this just because yeah, I'll have perspectives and ways I look at things and they're not unbiased. They're based on my experiences. So just like everybody else, we all have our lens. So I did start I grew up in the United States. I moved to Australia 22 years ago. So I've had like substantial more than 2 decades in each country. And growing up in the US, I went up through the NCAA system as an athlete, then as both a skills coach. I coached in softball in at University of Wisconsin at La Crosse, and also as strength conditioning coach. So across many sports, like anyone that's been in that system, you never get just one team unless you have gridiron football. Um, So had bunch of teams at a couple different universities, and then when I moved to Australia, stayed. I've always kind of been an S&C coach, kept that in my wheelhouse, but I moved to Australia, did my PhD in sports science at the time, working with our softball team. So many players that went on to represent Australia over the years, or over the 18 years of that kind of progress. I jumped around sports, always had kind of like a dual role. So I worked at a university teaching in the Masters of Strength Conditioning for much of that time, a couple different universities, but mostly at Edith Cowan University in that program. And then, as part of my role, just either being seconded or bought out, worked for Surfing Australia and Softball Australia as a strength conditioning, sports science, high performance consultant, manager, or practitioner, depending on the role. So, yeah, always kind of having two hats on, like the science side, and then literally requesting that we lift that faster side. So like the actual reality on the ground, or you want to do something, but it's not in the mentality of the team or the coaches. So the real struggles that really prevent you or provide barriers to doing what you'd like to do versus what you can do. So yeah, I've kind of had those two experiences, like I said, and lucky enough to be in at least two countries for a substantial amount of time to wish I could take the best of both and combine it and make a new country. But I haven't done
What would
that
that country be
successfully yet.
called? What would
Yeah,
you do with that? That'd be
I'm not
an
sure.
issue.
It could be politically fraught if I declared that at the current time. So I'll opt out. That I'll take the fifth.
Just on that, because I know, from other coaches that I've spoken to, strength and conditioning coaches have links with, universities. And from your experience of having kind of a foot in both camps, was that always the plan, or was it kind of just how it happened? And do you think that there was always a positive crossover, or do you reckon any, or from your experience, was there any times where they kind of butted heads a little bit from the maybe academic side and the in the trenches in the gym side of things, if you like?
Yeah, that's a real, there was no plan. So I can just say that one really easy. No plan. I just kept doing things that I really enjoyed doing, and I took opportunities when they arose. So that's how I made the decision to move multiple times. Um, it was just an opportunity taken, so I didn't map it out. I guess it's like writing a program, like you could map it out and then day one comes and you throw the map out, so to speak. So I didn't bother with the mapping, but I, I maybe maybe by my nature, and again, not like planned, I do tend to stay really honest and true to myself. So something that does deeply connect to me. And so that my interests just kept coming up. So I was growing up, like I was just interested in sport. I just really love sport. I love playing about it. I love learning about it, but I also really like science and math and you know, so um I just followed where each one of those opportunities. Sometimes it took me more towards, I guess you could say, an academic science background, but you don't remove yourself. It's not like taken out of the context of just having been an athlete, being coached. Um, when it comes to that competitive, like the butting heads you mentioned about academia or applied, yeah, they butt heads all the time. But what I've found is that if you are a bit of a person that needs to follow the recognition by the way the system currently says good is, you'll make a lot of bad decisions. Maybe immediate reward, you know, but I just I just did things because they felt right to me. They were meaningful to me, and probably more so, they were meaningful to players. Um, And I could never remove the idea that I was trying to do something that I wish were done with me as a player, right? And so if I started removing myself from that, then I just became the people or the persons that delivered a program to me that I felt like could have maybe been better or, and it's all time context. Like they were probably doing the best they could in the context they were, but, I always wished there were more, or I wish I knew what I know now then.
Yeah.
Um, for many people, they don't have the privilege to act in that way, to think on the long term or stay committed. They might be making decisions to keep a job. Um, and I was able to not have to fully make decisions because of keeping a job because I happen to be in quite secure roles, which is the opposite of sport traditionally. So
Yeah.
that's the security that an academic role does provide you. But then I kind of just merge that system as I could to stay true and deliver consistency in the applied context. To be perfectly honest, that didn't benefit my academic career early on.
Yeah.
I would have been thought of as underperforming in productivity for publishing because apparently we counted papers, how many papers you published meant something,
Right.
but not necessarily measuring the impact. Like, what did that do for a team or an athlete or sport more broadly? Did you change the way we do things? It's in hindsight now. I think I published a training study that was like 26 weeks long. I just loved working with softball. It wasn't a political statement, but I wanted to just demonstrate to people, hey, these athletes, when given uh, program and support and they train, they get better. It's
Yeah.
not that complicated. They're not special as a deficit. The- These athletes, if you can hear anything, I have someone doing the construction downstairs, so hopefully
All
it's cutting
right.
the noise out.
No, no, I can't hear
Um,
anything.
oh, perfect, good. Um, you know, I I focused on that, just proving that we weren't different as a deficit, and when I say we, I mean women athletes,
Yeah.
and that when you train, you advance, and that advancement improves and we'll talk about this robustness, durability, your strength, all of those good things that is the intent of a training program,
Yeah.
not an outcome, but the process of doing. Um, when I did that, no one was citing that paper. It actually had a huge amount of like resistance to even get published, I remember. Now it's like hugely cited. It changed the trajectory of training women, things like that. It's funny. I think it's still one of the longer training study papers, even though it's quite observational in nature. How
Yeah.
crazy is that? 20 years ago, and we're still trying to, instead of do an 8 week or 12-week paper, even just 26 weeks, which depending on your sport is like your whole season.
Yeah. Yeah.
We just don't
Yeah.
have those papers. So yeah, I love to break rules, and so if you tell me there is a rule, I think about all the ways you can go around the rule.
Yeah, there's things there. There's what's that phrase? Rules are there, rules there to be broken, and plus as well, I think that sometimes, within the right context, that's how you can learn and find out a little bit more. And you've mentioned there a couple of times about wanting to change the system, do things a little bit differently, and that kind of goes into the topics that I had in mind for this episode. And from especially with it being the strength chat podcast, myself having an interest in strength, whether it be from competing in powerlifting or working with sport, there's kind of strength as, look, we're going to put more weight on the bar. Then it's a case of, right, how can you move that? But then there's that thing of, especially when we're applying it to sport, is that robustness. And I often feel as though that word is kind of like thrown around a little bit, but there's no kind of yeah, maybe definition or understanding of how does that fit with strength? Is it something different to strength? How does that fit into the program? So I suppose the first question is what does kind of like strength and robustness look like to you? Do you think of them as two separate things? Or can they be linked, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to give a talk. I think it was late last year at the UK SCA. They did ask for provocative, so I did try to just it's mostly a strength conditioning group, right? It's UKSCA. And I just wanted to question like what are we doing to strength? Um, it's not a secret. I believe strength as a construct is an incredibly important thing. There won't be a day that I don't think it's important. So if that's my bias, that's fine. So if I do everything to justify its importance, it's not a justification. Like there's enough established evidence that indicates that individuals that improve their strength over time have a reduced risk of injury, like as a holistic, and some very large papers to that. That demonstrate that. But recently, I've been seeing a little bit of a pushback on this idea of strength, and I don't think it's because the idea of strength. And what I'd like to say, I did compete in powerlifting, so you know, I'm like anybody else that's a power lifter. Like you read deeply into Poliquin and West Side, right? Like these might not have been scientific publications, but these people they knew things,
Yeah.
right? They they knew things and they knew things by trial and error and which is essentially the scientific method, by the way. So just because it's not published, it's not that we can't learn. And I was really grateful for like my education from that starting early, as I think every early strength coach like goes through these phases of our learning. When I think about it, I never heard those people obsess about the number you put up until it came to the meet,
Yeah.
where that's the point, right? But it was always about they taught us all these neat things around building the capacity around the lift you were training for, and we'll call them accessories. And, like Westside did so many things about the importance of posterior chain, like the invention of something to do a reverse hyper, which is like, it's like the number one exercise that loses favor and then gains favor and loses favor,
Yeah.
gains favor, right? And I was thinking about what we're doing now. And we have so many ways to measure strength. And every day I open a paper or I look online or I look at a new piece of equipment. And by equipment, I mean like testing equipment,
Yeah.
technology particularly. We've got new, simpler force plates. We've got force transducers that can attach to things. There's just a way to measure strength as defined as the amount of force you can put out in whatever task that we're measuring. And I felt like we were losing sight that when we talk about strength, we probably need to rapidly attach, hyphenate it, never forget that it's separate from training, strength training. And when we talk about strength, we used to assume when I say we need strength, that we used to always say that was like short term for strength train for life, continued to train. The process of training gives you real strength.
Yeah.
And I just think we got lost by using that short term. And then I thought, oh, maybe we should revisit some other words, either broaden the definition of strength so it's not just operationalized as force, because it's more than that,
Yeah.
or consider these terms robustness and durability, which ironically have more pedigree in endurance literature.
Yeah.
Robustness and durability, cycling, they've discussed this over time, but I think it has a different context in strength literature, but we don't talk about it very much. So yeah, I just poked the bear and said maybe strength should be more likely defined, and I literally took it from the definition like onlinedictionary.com
Yeah.
was not my brain. And I defined it as the capacity to resist stress and strain. And in that definition, it gave the synonym durability. Now, I don't know if it should be a synonym. I think strength training gives you durability. Strength, when operationalized, is the amount of force you can produce in that task. But I think I often talk about things I don't have fully formed in my brain
Yeah.
because this helps me poke holes in my own argument and figure out where I need more clarity. So this is where I am. I'm in the throes of arguing with myself on this. But what I won't argue with is that we need to stop conflating or mixing up that how strong you are as an absolute number
Yeah,
is the same as the process of strength training over time and what that gives you in attributes beyond the amount of force you can produce.
yeah. Because I think looking at that, when you're saying about just having it as strength, and it's just by right, you need to hit that number. It's kind of yeah, just one point where it's success or failure, and even if whatever, whether it's even I'm just thinking about this because I've got PT later on in the day. Even if it's like fat loss, for example, you need more wins. And I always relate it to, I'm a big fan of an analogy. So it's a little bit like, if you only have one game in a season and you lose that game, that's it, that's your season gone. Whereas if you have 10 games over the course of a season and you win six of them, all right, okay, so and then you can judge how things are getting better. So I think more markers are useful because it's all just information, and then it's how you use that information. Moving away from that, because I think, and this could be a different rabbit hole to go down, just increasing that weight on the bar is a good indicator, like what I just said, of are those, let's just stick with sport, those athletes are getting stronger. If they're getting stronger, then you can maybe say, right, well, they're going to be able to do X, Y, or Z on the pitch, on the court, or anything like that. It's an actual number. When we're talking about like robustness in training, you could even touch on kind of like injuries, output, all those sorts of things. What does that kind of training look like? Because, when you're wanting that durability, wanting that continued cycle of training, you mentioned this earlier of this is how things have been done before. And then, Lewis Simmons, the reverse hyper, all of a sudden it changes the game a little bit. What does that training look like? Is it a case of you need, coaches and teams need to change their training, or just think about maybe where the testing throughout that phase is different, or is it how we're actually tracking progress is going to be different? I realize I've just spoken quite a lot at you there, but
Yeah.
does that kind of make sense what I've said there?
No, so I'm been working on a way to paint this simply so we can all get on board, kind of critique it ourselves, have a like a little bit of a framework, like how we can do this better. So I've kind of split it up. So I think strength, the quantification, like how much you lift, I agree with exactly what you said. Like ultimately it should be going up. Like I'm not advocating that it shouldn't be going up. But I think that number is something that you zoom further back out. And I've put some graphs up previously looking at um, when I look at someone's improvement in strength, I want to look at it over seasons. Like I don't obsess about it within that's a difference between monitoring and progression, right? Progressions over a long term, zoom out, look at it, not even in months. I really do think season to season, right? And testing at the same time of season, just before preseason. Um, and at the end of preseason, I mean, when you kind of like try to maximize those and then you try to sustain it through the season, right? And in some sports you won't sustain it. Some sports you can maintain it, and in some sports you can improve. And that's highly dependent on the demand of the sport and density of schedule and all those things. So I think of strength as zoom the furthest out, separate to monitoring. How do you progress over seasons, over your life, right? Then I think about robustness as very acute, like within the session. And I think this has implications for how you train. So like if um I'll use Daniel Kadlik, who I work with quite a lot. Dan works in at Edith Cowan University with me, and he's looking at movement variability. Um, and I'll give you the analogy. Like if I had an athlete that jumped, they had a vertical jump and it was 45 centimeters. And then when you constrain them in a way, like think about a defender being in your face in basketball. When a defender's in your face, when they jump, all of a sudden their 45 centimeter vertical drops down to 35. because something about not letting them like do a lot of hip flexion takes away their power,
Yeah.
so to speak, right? Would you rather have that athlete, 45 centimeter, but under that constraint drops to 35 for max output? Or would you rather have the athlete next to them who says max vertical is 40 centimeters, so lower, it's in between, but no matter what you do to them, defender in their face, they have to do a jab step, 40 centimeters comes out every time. They are robust to kind of constraining the system, disruption. And when you say what's athleticism, athleticism is being able to succeed repeatedly despite what someone does to someone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and that's very dangerous, right? Because how do you play someone like that? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what you do to them, they can at least internally perform. That is robustness, so very acute. And I think movement variability and the work that he's done and a couple of others, another one that I've had the chance to work with, Jake Cowan. He's written a great review on that topic from movement variability, and I think that's really looking at robustness. So we've got strength, I would prefer to zoom out. Robustness, you can zoom in, and that's like changing exercises on someone.
Yeah.
That now this goes to what I learned very first learnings, like that's slight variations in hand position when you're pressing. That's when people add perturbation to things, you know? Like that's a way of making something more difficult, but not adding more load. It's
Yeah.
not, it may have perceived higher intensity, but it's due to task difficulty or doing things under fatigue, right?
Yeah.
Then the last one that I'm trying to sort out a good definition, how we actually measure it. That's the harder one, acknowledging this is the one I'm like working through is durability. And durability is kind of like marrying up strength and robustness. I think by the nature of training to develop robustness and inflections of increases in strength, that if you get those two things well, your durability will enhance. And durability is kind of sustained performance over a long time. So not the one-off force measure, but just almost the ability to be able to show up every day and train. So resistance to injury, resistance to high load sessions or multiple games. Like, yeah, you'll fatigue, but you are more durable in being able to come back over time. So it's almost like the middle ground one between zoom furthest out for strength, zoom tight in for robustness, and durability is like just the battler, like the person that never misses a match, never misses a training. Um, and by the nature of that, like some of the things we saw at the AIS um, said that the people that win medals are the ones that basically miss the least trainings.
Yeah.
Not necessarily do any one thing special, but they just get to practice as much as possible because they don't get sick and they don't get injured.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of unsexy, right? It's like the people who get to show up every day are more likely to show up when it counts.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny, I don't know how much rugby you follow, but I'm quite a big rugby fan. And, you looked at some players over the Six Nations, even though England didn't have a very good Six Nations. Um, a couple of players got 50 caps. The England captain, Mauro Itoje, got 100. He got his 100th cap. And when you're saying there about his durability, he actually, I think, out of those 100, I'm completely guessing at this. I don't know the stats. I did see them before. He maybe started 90 of those tests, and for a lot of them, he's played maybe 70 minutes of that. Nearly a full game. And it's that thing of, those there's probably been more. Uh, Talented, gifted players that can change a game like that. But you look at how many caps they've had, how many games they've played, they've been injured, they've picked this up, they've picked up. So being able to consistently perform is kind of like the goal. Like I agree with what you're saying there. One thing that you were saying about, what is athleticism. You use the basketball example, and going back to what's been done before. There's the maybe not principles is the right word, but what's been done before, and then there's either side of that spectrum where people can push it a little bit. What's kind of your take? Because especially, when you said there, you're having that argument in your head of, how does this look? How does this pan out a little bit? What's kind of like taking it too far where we're not actually going to see progress? We've gone too far away from that robustness, and it's just kind of like these crazy exercises that become really hard to perform and have gone too far one way or the other, but still centered to um, wanting to get results, get athletes performing on the pitch or the court. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's a really good dissection of that because I hadn't even thought about it like that. And this goes to my bias because I think everyone else is thinking just like me. Like, obviously, what you would do is you would seek to do mundane, boring, high mechanical overload over high task difficulty. So, and you do that at nauseum for years and years and years. Because first thing you want to do is increase your durability before the robustness.
Yeah,
And durability, I think, and think about durability from a tissue perspective, is that lots of stress and strain accumulated over time, which goes to me being sassy and go, maybe we should call strength that, because then you know what you're programming for, which is an accumulation of mechanical stress and strain, because that ultimately builds as many tissues in as ro and I won't use the term because then we'll get in a way that you accumulate load.
yeah,
So you can, and once you accumulate that, you can tolerate it, right? I think too many individuals do what you were kind of touching on is because we're obsessed with what's in front of us, just like we're obsessed with force as the measure of strength, and we're obsessed with it today. And I got to get it by the end of season so I can hit my KPI to show I made my whole team stronger. Um, And really, what we need is to realize this is a long, slow, amazingly boring process. Um, and that process is probably most critical early on when you're setting. And I don't even know if early on, and I mean in youth. So thinking before puberty, through puberty, and just after puberty. I can't confirm that perspective that that's a escalated period for, skill acquisition. There's a lot of comments and people are arguing whether that's true or not. But what I can say definitively is that's the time when you set your habits.
yeah,
And if you set your habits then, you're more likely to maintain that habit. But it's like learning a language. Like if you want to learn another language, learn it when you're younger, because picking that up later is a lot harder. So I can't tell you whether you get escalated adaptation during that time per se. We do know that for bone, that time period is critical, but all the rest of the tissue. But what you do is you set habits of just doing the necessary things of high mechanical overload, stress and strain, build durability. And then when you have that durability, you probably can tolerate greater things to test or train your robustness. And I actually think we do it the other way around because everyone gets bored or they want to do something interesting or sexy or new thing. And I repeatedly say, yeah, mundane excellence gets regularly interrupted by unproven interventions.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good phrase on there because wanting to do things that it's a little bit like shock and awe, just like put something in there that's going to change it from then. Do you think this might be a little bit of a tangent, but you know, again, you mentioned earlier about sport that sometimes having that security and that time to be able to do things isn't always there. Do you think that's where? I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some you see some clubs that like think long term, they lay a really solid foundation and then build from there, and they kind of go through a period where it's a little bit tricky, but then they reap the rewards at the end. Do you think it's just a case of kind of people outside kind of the strength conditioning athletic world kind of want results right now. And have you seen maybe a change or a shift in terms of, well, actually more time focusing on these things is going to be a little bit more beneficial later down the line rather than drastic change, which is just kind of having that cycle of where nothing really changes.
Yeah, so I've been trying to attack this from the systems lens, like really who's responsible for the long-term health of the athlete. That's actually why I've been interested listening to the players' associations, what their challenges are, what they're searching for, and when they can do collective bargaining agreements and the like, and trying to figure out how you fit this idea. Like, how do you help support and protect players' rights to make sure that even if you're changing clubs, you're changing leagues, that actually the long game is kept. And it is a player health idea. Like durability is about player health. Um, and the only system I can say that soon we might be able to go retrospectively look at to see how a change was elicited an unintended consequence is actually the NCAA system. So anyone that's not aware, I'll quickly give you the history of NCAA. Typically, players would come in and they would have a 4 or 5 year period where they're going to play for one team or one school for 4 to 5 years. And that was really steady for like, well, about 50 years. And so strength conditioning coaches always thought this first year freshmen, what we called their first year, it's just getting the base, teaching you how to train. Anyone who knows the Canadian kind of learn to train, train to train. Um, it was like the perfect representation of that. When they go to the second and third year, you advance, and by their fourth year, you've laid the foundation. They have greater durability. You can put in things to challenge robustness in a session, right? Strength coaches everywhere, they don't know how good we had it. And
Yeah.
I was part of that system, loved it because I thought of people as 4 year, at least 4 year developments,
Mm.
not one season. Now, the NCAA, rightly so, without without players, you have no game. Players said, we have the rights to our name, image, and likeness. So there was a decision that was made in the NCAA system where now they have name, image, and likeness payments, and simultaneously they enabled a transfer portal. And this is good when a player goes in. Again, right premise. Player doesn't connect with coach, isn't being treated fairly. Um, Lots of things. Actually, most players said they went in the transfer portal for mental health related reasons. So, not something you're going to block. But now there's no guarantee and there's a lot less consistency. So, players are changing between teams or schools potentially every year. So
Yeah.
you start over. It feels very much more like the professional ranks if you don't get a multi-year contract. Well, what that rips apart that we haven't thought about is we no longer have this wonderful 4 year plan, long-term athlete development. You've got a new coach every year starting over, feeling like they need to get them to perform because if they don't perform, then they'll just jump in the transfer portal and go somewhere else. So, long story, but you needed the background to
Yeah.
understand. I think we should watch what happens to the health durability of the players before that period and then with that period because although it won't be fully causal, it will be a very clear line in the sand when a change in the system elicited changes in behavior that would be deemed the biggest influence of difference, and whether we see higher numbers of overuse injuries or what would be catastrophic high time loss injuries. So I think it's something we can watch to learn from the unintended consequence of that, which goes to what you said about when a system loses sight of the long-term development, it's highly likely that maybe not right away, but over a career, there's a loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think because it was interesting. I had a chat with a coach a couple of weeks ago, and it was kind of like coming down to, I know we've spoken about training there and how that would look, um, but ultimately it's going to come down to and I think you touched on it there, kind of like the health of the athlete. And we said there right at the start about if you're traveling, what are the things that you need to do? So yes, you might just be standing on a stage speaking and not performing on a pitch or anything, but there's things there that make you feel healthy, whether that's physically or mentally from there. And do you think that, if you get the um, environment right, that all the things that we've said about strength, durability, robustness kind of fall in place naturally because the environment the athlete is in is a place where they feel like they can perform. Whereas, like what you've said there, if they're swapping and changing all the time, I am a big believer in, yes, there's all of the technical science side of things, but ultimately you're still working with that person in front of you, working with that team in front of you. How do you get the best out of that person in terms of, what's the criteria that you need for that season or anything? Do you think that's where environment can help everything else fall in place?
I mean, I think that's the premise of why we pay so much for good coaches. You get a roster, you have the exact same roster, a new coach comes in with that same roster and they could turn a season around. Nothing changed except often coaches do set the environment, they set the tone, they set so I'm using those terms, but the short answer is yeah, environment matters an enormous amount. Um, and it can sometimes we don't have a shortage of ability, we don't have a shortage of resources, we have a shortage of cultural understanding and consistency and direction because there are so many competing demands on players. Um, they just need support to not have to make another decision about what priority should be for themselves. Someone that has a clear direction of what the priorities are already cut decision-making fatigue for those players so that they can actually focus on the decisions that they have to make instead of, yeah. Um, yeah, it's a really environment is a it's a thing we know is important, but because it's a little harder to quantify, it keeps going to you know it when you see it, but I couldn't tell you how to get it.
Yeah. And that kind of goes, coming, full circle when we were speaking at the start about, applying all of these things. Now that we've got to that end thing of, right, it's the environment. Do you think, and similar to what we've done throughout this chat, for the S&C coaches listening, that's maybe the thought process that they need to go into their when they're developing their program, rather than just trying to think of just this one block, just zooming out a little bit and seeing, right, how can we, apply these things to then, see that result, if that makes sense, from kind of like full circle from what we spoke about at the start.
Yeah, and then that goes to I agree. Yes, that they have to do that. Um, but I think it goes to the next part is the why do people feel like they need to change the program a lot or do the next best thing? And it's because they are trying to capture the interest and motivation of players. Like I hope that's like the primary reason, or even capture their own interest and motivation. Fine. Um, so then that goes to how you tell the story to the athlete and or yourself or your leadership and your coach about why these things that are not as fun maybe perceived or make them fun. You can always make them a little more fun. Um, why they are really basic, and why they need to be done over consistency over intensity, why that matters. And I just chatted about this. I think this is a little bit like financial literacy. And so it's just drawing a parallel, like players right now, they might get paid a lot and they could spend a lot. And then they realize that they have a really short career. And if you treat your money like that, you won't have any money at the back end. Your money and your body have more in common than difference. So I know that like an 19-year-old phenom doesn't want to hear about, you know, interest, but, starting early, even just with a little bit, accumulates interest, just like training early and consistently accumulates over time. And this is why I'm so interested in this idea of durability is is the accumulation of the interest on the body. Um, so that's really easy for people to understand, particularly older people in your environment. So got to convince the leadership, the coach, maybe high performance manager. Listen, they're going to be at an age where they're like, I wish I started saving for retirement earlier. So
Yeah,
you're gonna hit something that becomes personal, and then you just do the analogy to their athletes' bodies. And then you need to make that important to the athlete. And nothing's better than bringing in an ex-athlete to talk about all their regrets,
yeah,
right? So again, it goes back to storytelling. And then when they come in and they're like, oh, I don't want to like squat and press and pull. We squat and press and pull every day. And I'm like, well, pick a different color dumbbell. I don't care. Like, make it interesting somehow. But, and we will do things. I mean, I'm clearly joking. We'll make it competitive. We'll
yeah,
put in a game. There'll be something. But some days I just go, listen, this just has to get done. Progress is better than perfection. And remember that if you do this a little bit every day, it will always surmount the intensity of making up for past performance.
yeah.
And yeah, sometimes you go in and you just grind it out and you hate every single rep, but your later self will thank your former self for doing that.
Yeah, definitely. There's a phrase just while you were speaking there. I hope you're not hearing it when you said about construction. Um, for whatever reason, every day in Thailand, some work is getting done on the apartment block that I'm in. So hopefully you can't hear the absolute power drill that is going on outside. But yeah,
I think we're in the same apartment block because
yeah,
I'm kind of seeing.
yeah. There's a phrase, and again, I'm sorry to whoever it is who wrote the quote, but it's kind of like 10% of the time you'll feel, awesome and like want to smash the session. 10% of the time you'll feel awful and not want to get it done. And then in the middle, you've got that time where it's just kind of like just turning up and getting it done, and building it and building it from there. And I think you mentioned on this a little bit more of at the start of the chat is, you always want to leave something in a better place than what you've left it. And then, I think it is a natural cycle for old athletes when they've left, think, I wish I could have had this, and then pass it on from there. Same as like coaches, passing that on and thinking, yeah, we should have done, we should have done this. Because I do think that everything is kind of like progressing from there. But quite a lot of topics, tangents thrown in there, Sophia. But for everyone listening, what would be your take home points or words of wisdom from everything that we've chatted about today?
Yeah, I mean, it's not one that's new. Like consistency beats intensity every day of the week. Um, so I mean, I that's definitely the take home, and probably the other one is, and I mentioned this in some previous talks too, is that make sure you focus on the inputs of training more than you focus on the outputs. The outputs are a guidance, but because it takes time, you don't get a manifestation of the inputs immediate. You know you're going to be waiting to see the fruits of that labor. That means the only thing you can control and focus on are the inputs because it's going to be a delayed gratification and always remember that.
Yeah, two good words of wisdom there, and a good sum up from there. I think there's a lot of really good information, content, and things that people can apply from what we've spoken about today. If anyone has any questions about what we've spoken about today, or want to reach out to you, ask you any questions, or see kind of like the content that you share, where could people find you or reach out to you, Sophia?
Yeah, easy. Two easiest places on Instagram. So my handle's at docsoph, DOCSOPH, and or my website, which is the same name. And there's you can access me by just entering a query.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Sophia, for taking the time to jump on today. I thought that was a really, really interesting chat. A lot of really good information there. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will catch you all at the next episode.